In 2006, a struggling online bookstore quietly started renting out spare computer storage. Every serious tech executive in the country looked at it and saw nothing worth defending against. 7 years later, that side project was generating tens of billions of dollars a year, and every company that ignored it was scrambling to copy something they no longer had time to catch up to. Nobody lost that war in a single battle. They lost it the moment they decided the opening move wasn't worth watching. This is what real strategic power actually looks like. Not louder, not faster, invisible, for exactly as long as invisibility is useful. And then, all at once, undeniable. Every competitor, every rival, every institution operates with a map of what threats look like. The problem is, that map was drawn using the past. And anything that doesn't match a threat they've already seen simply doesn't register as a threat at all. In strategic theory, this gap has a name, a blind spot generated by prior probability. If your opponent's mental model assigns almost zero chance to a specific move ever happening, then the moment you make that exact move, their entire framework for evaluating you breaks. Not because the move was more powerful than expected, because it wasn't supposed to exist in their model at all. This single mechanism explains why the most devastating strategic moves in history rarely look devastating on day one. They look small, unserious, beneath the notice of anyone actually running the board. And that's not an accident. It's the exact condition the move needed to survive long enough to matter. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle anyone currently sitting on top of a market, a hierarchy, or a competition of any kind. The stronger your current position, the wider your blind spot tends to be. Dominant players allocate their attention exactly where their current profits are concentrated. Every resource, every strategic conversation, every defensive instinct gets pointed at protecting what's already working. That's not laziness. It's rational in the short term. But it means anything happening outside that zone of attention gets systematically defended. Precisely because defending it wouldn't show up as a win on this quarter's numbers. This is why an incumbent almost never gets disrupted by a better version of what they're already doing. They get disrupted by something that initially looks worse. Cheaper, smaller, aimed at customers too unprofitable to matter. Until the moment it quietly crosses a threshold nobody was monitoring. And by then, matching it costs more than the incumbent is willing or able to pay. Go back to that quiet infrastructure project from an online retailer. Enterprise software giants at the time were selling multi-year hardware contracts worth millions of dollars per deal. A pay-as-you-go computing service aimed at individual developers looked, from inside that world, like an irrelevant experiment, barely worth a meeting, let alone a competitive response. For nearly 7 years that assumption held. No serious rival built an equivalent offering, and in that silence, the irrelevant experiment quietly built the exact things that make a market position nearly impossible to dislodge later. Deep integration into thousands of businesses, developer habits formed early enough to calcify into loyalty, and economies of scale that got cheaper every year. Competitors weren't building anything comparable. By the time the first credible competitor arrived, the game had already changed shape. The category wasn't up for grabs anymore. It had an owner. A chip manufacturer did something even stranger around the same era. It started adding expensive, non-essential circuitry to products built almost entirely for gamers, purely to enable general-purpose computing tasks that had no obvious commercial payoff at the time. Analysts criticized it openly. It raised manufacturing costs. It lowered margins. It served a market so small it barely registered on a balance sheet. For over a decade, the company kept funding it anyway, distributing the underlying software toolkit freely to universities and research labs, seemingly for no return beyond goodwill. Then a breakthrough in machine learning research, revealed that the exact hardware architecture built for rendering video game graphics happened to be extraordinarily efficient at training neural networks. And because an entire generation of researchers had already trained on that company's tools for a decade, when the artificial intelligence boom finally arrived, there was no meaningful alternative left to switch to. What looked like a decade of wasted margin turned out to be the most patient monopoly building move of the era. None of this happens by accident. Staying invisible long enough for a move to mature requires active, deliberate signal management, and there are really only a few ways to pull it off. One method is distraction, publicly engaging in low-stakes, visible conversations while the actual capital and attention quietly flow somewhere else entirely. Competitors watch the noise. The real move happens underneath it. A second method is disguise, burying the real investment inside categories so mundane that nobody analyzing the balance sheet thinks to ask what it's actually funding. Research and development gets logged, but not decoded. A third method is generosity as camouflage, giving critical infrastructure away for free, framed as goodwill or open access, right up until adoption reaches a scale where switching away becomes more expensive than staying, at which point monetization begins, and by then there's no viable exit for anyone who built on top of it. None of these mechanisms require deception in the dramatic sense. They require patience most competitors don't have, and comfort with looking, for years at a time, like the move isn't working at all. There's a formula underneath all of this that strips away the specific case studies and gets to the raw mechanism. The advantage a stealth move secures is directly proportional to how long it takes competitors to recognize it as a threat and mount an effective response. Every additional unit of time before that recognition happens compounds the gap. Not linearly. The initiator isn't just staying ahead, they're accelerating away. Because every quarter of unopposed execution builds structural advantages that get more expensive to close with each passing cycle. This is why the specific delay before a competitor reacts matters more than almost any other variable in the entire equation. Speed of execution matters. Speed of concealment for exactly long enough matters more. This mechanism isn't unique to corporate strategy. It shows up anywhere a rigid set of assumptions creates an exploitable gap. A streaming platform once used detailed viewing data to greenlight an original show without even producing a traditional pilot, while an entire legacy media industry still assumed streaming platforms existed purely to license their old content, not to become direct competitors for original intellectual property. A social platform built its entire distribution engine around individual video performance rather than existing social connections, while established platforms kept optimizing around follower counts, unable to explain why videos from unknown accounts kept outperforming content from users with massive established audiences. A retail brand eliminated seasonal inventory entirely, replacing it with unpredictable, limited drops, while traditional retailers stayed locked into a model built around forecasting demand months in advance, never adapting to a customer base that had started treating scarcity itself as the actual product. Different industries, identical mechanism. A set of assumptions nobody thought to question, and someone quietly building outside the boundary those assumptions drew. Sometimes the unseen move isn't executed by a single company at all. It emerges from thousands of uncoordinated individuals exploiting the same blind spot simultaneously. In early 2021, large institutional funds had built short positions against a struggling retailer, exceeding the entire available float of tradable shares. A position built on the assumption that dispersed retail traders posed no coordinated threat capable of moving the stock meaningfully. That assumption became the exact vulnerability. Distributed traders, aggregating small amounts of capital through short, dated options, forced market makers into a hedging spiral that sent the stock price into a trajectory institutional models never accounted for. Billions in losses followed, not because anyone out-resourced the institutions, but because nobody at those institutions had built a defense against coordination they didn't believe was possible. Strip every case study away, and one uncomfortable truth remains. None of these outcomes were secured by whoever announced the loudest ambitions or moved the fastest in public. They were secured by whoever was willing to look unserious for long enough that nobody bothered building a defense. That's a genuinely difficult position to hold because it requires tolerating exactly the kind of dismissal that makes most people abandon a plan. Quiet criticism, low visible traction, years of looking like the slower, smaller, less impressive option in the room. The actors who won weren't immune to that discomfort. They simply understood something the rest of the field didn't. Being underestimated isn't a cost to escape. For a long enough runway, it's the entire mechanism the plan depends on. Every rival you'll ever face is operating from a mental model built entirely on what they've already seen before. That model has edges. Somewhere just outside those edges sits an entire category of moves they haven't accounted for, aren't watching for, and won't believe in even if you tell them directly. That space isn't a weakness in their position. It's the only real opening you'll ever get. The loudest strategy in the room rarely wins the decade. The one nobody thought to defend against usually does. Find the edge of what they believe is possible. Build there. Say nothing until it's already too late to stop.